The blazing Arizona sun glinted off the crystal glasses arranged on the dining table as Lillian Montgomery watched her stepmother, Eleanor, pour the wine with unusual attentiveness. Something about the woman's thin smile sent a chill down Lillian's spine, despite the summer heat that pressed against the windows of their grand home on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona Territory. 1882. A special vintage, Eleanor purred, placing a glass before Lillian with deliberate care. To celebrate your 21st birthday, dear. Lillian nodded politely, though suspicion gnawed at her. Ever since her father's unexpected death 3 months prior, Eleanor's behavior had grown increasingly strange. The reading of James Montgomery's will was scheduled for tomorrow, and tension hung in the air between them, thick as the dust that coated the plains during drought season. A knock at the door interrupted the uncomfortable silence. Eleanor's lips tightened with annoyance. Who could that be at this hour? Their housekeeper, Martha, shuffled to answer. Moments later, a tall figure filled the doorway to the dining room. The stranger's presence immediately commanded attention: broad shoulders, weather-worn hat, and eyes the color of the sky before a storm. "Pardon the intrusion," he said, removing his hat. "Vincent Ainsley, your father's lawyer sent me ahead with some documents that couldn't wait until tomorrow." Lillian rose to greet him. "Mr. Ainsley, I wasn't expecting—" "No." The shout came from behind her as Vincent lunged forward with surprising speed, knocking the wine glass from Lillian's hand just as she'd raised it to her lips. The crystal shattered against the hardwood floor, dark liquid pooling like blood. "What is the meaning of this?" Eleanor demanded, her face flushing scarlet. Vincent Ainsley's gaze never left Eleanor's face. "I believe you know exactly what this means, madam." Lillian stared at the spilled wine, then at her stepmother's face, which had drained of all color. "Eleanor." "He's mad," Eleanor whispered, backing away from the table. "This man is clearly deranged." "I've been tracking poisoning cases from San Francisco to Tucson," Vincent said calmly, reaching into his coat pocket to produce a badge. "U.S. Marshal. And I've been investigating your late husband's death, Mrs. Montgomery. Found it mighty interesting that the symptoms matched those of arsenic poisoning." Lillian felt the room spin. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Vincent replied, his eyes still fixed on Eleanor, "that your father's death wasn't from heart failure, and I reckon your stepmother had planned for you to join him tonight." Eleanor's composure shattered. With a shriek, she overturned the table and bolted for the door, sending dishes crashing to the floor. Vincent moved with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to danger, easily outpacing the fleeing woman and blocking her escape. "There's nowhere to run, Mrs. Montgomery. Deputies are stationed outside." As Eleanor was taken away, screaming threats and accusations, Lillian sank into her chair, trembling hands covering her face. The reality of how close she had come to death crashed over her like a wave. "Miss Montgomery." Vincent's voice had softened as he returned to the dining room. "Are you all right?" Lillian looked up at the man who had saved her life. "How did you know?" "Your father's lawyer grew suspicious after your father's death. Hired me privately to look into it before the will reading." Vincent knelt beside her chair. "I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way." That night changed everything for Lillian Montgomery. By morning, her stepmother was in custody, her father's death under investigation, and Lillian found herself with an unexpected protector who would become far more than just the man who knocked a poisoned glass from her hand. The days following Eleanor's arrest passed in a blur for Lillian. The evidence against her stepmother mounted quickly: arsenic found hidden among Eleanor's possessions, witnesses who'd seen her purchasing the poison in different towns, and eventually a confession extracted in exchange for avoiding the gallows. Lillian learned that her father's fortune, which she was set to inherit upon turning 21, had been the motive. Eleanor, younger than James by 15 years and his wife of only 3, had married for money and grew impatient waiting. Vincent Ainsley remained in Tucson, his official duties expanding to include protective detail for Lillian as threats from Eleanor's few allies trickled in. At first, their relationship maintained strict professionalism. He was a lawman doing his job, she a woman recovering from betrayal and grief. But as May turned to June and the desert heat intensified, something else grew between them, fragile as a desert flower. "You don't have to stay with me at all times," Lillian told Vincent one evening as they sat on the veranda of the Montgomery ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Catalina Mountains gold and crimson. "I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself." Vincent smiled, the expression softening his otherwise stern features. "I've no doubt about that, Miss Montgomery. You've handled this ordeal with more courage than most men I know." "Lillian, please," she corrected him. "After saving my life, I think we've moved beyond formalities." "Lillian," he repeated, her name sounding different in his low, gentle tone. "And I'm Vincent, or Vince to friends." "Are we friends, Marshal Ainsley?" she asked, a slight smile playing at her lips for the first time in months. "I'd like to think so." His gaze returned to the mountains. "Truth be told, this assignment is far more pleasant than chasing outlaws across the territory." Lillian studied his profile in the fading light, the strong jaw darkened with stubble, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his serious demeanor implied. "How does one become a U.S. Marshal in the Arizona Territory?" she asked. Vincent chuckled. "Not by planning to, that's certain." He shifted in his chair, stretching his long legs. "I came west after the war, fought for the Union, though I was hardly more than a boy. Had no family left in Virginia, so I drifted. Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the Army. Eventually pinned on a deputy's badge in Yuma. Marshal noticed I had a knack for tracking and offered me a position. And now you catch poisoners instead of bank robbers. Justice wears many faces. Your father deserved his, and so did you." His blue eyes met hers. "Everyone deserves a chance at a full life, Lillian." Those words lingered in her mind long after he'd retired to the guest quarters for the night. A full life, something she hadn't contemplated since learning of her father's murder. The Montgomery ranch was hers now, along with her father's mining investments and considerable holdings in Tucson. She had wealth and independence, rare commodities for a woman in the territories. Yet sitting alone in her room, Lillian realized how empty it all felt without someone to share it with. The following morning, Lillian announced her decision at breakfast. "I want to sell the ranch," she said, watching surprise register on Vincent's face. "Not immediately, but eventually. This place holds too many memories now, both good and terrible ones." Vincent set down his coffee cup. "Where would you go?" "I've been corresponding with my father's sister in San Francisco. She's invited me to stay with her while I decide what I want to do with my life." Lillian hesitated. "Though I admit the prospect of traveling alone is somewhat daunting given recent events." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "The trial won't begin for at least a month. I could arrange an escort for you." "Actually," Lillian interrupted, gathering her courage, "I was hoping you might consider accompanying me yourself, officially, of course, as continued protection." Something flickered in his eyes, hesitation. Interest. Lillian couldn't tell. "That would require special permission from my superiors." "The jurisdiction. Surely Eleanor's associates might follow me to California," Lillian pressed. knowing her argument was thin but unable to admit her true motivation. She wasn't ready to say goodbye to Vincent Ainsley. A smile slowly spread across his face. "I suppose that's a reasonable concern. I'll wire the marshal's office today." Permission was granted with surprising ease apparently. Vincent had accumulated enough respect and goodwill that his request for the special assignment met little resistance. Preparations for the journey began immediately. They would travel by stagecoach to Yuma, then by train to Los Angeles, and finally by steamer to San Francisco. The first leg of their journey commenced on a sweltering July morning. Lillian had sold much of the furniture and household goods, keeping only family heirlooms and personal items that could be shipped separately. The stagecoach was crowded with 6 passengers besides Vincent and Lillian. There was a banker and his wife returning to California, a traveling salesman, and a quiet older woman who introduced herself as a schoolteacher. As the coach lurched forward, Lillian took one last look at the ranch house through the dust-streaked window. Her childhood home grew smaller in the distance until the rolling landscape swallowed it completely. Vincent, seated beside her, seemed to sense her melancholy. "Sometimes moving forward is the only way to find peace," he said quietly, for her ears alone. The journey to Yuma proved arduous. Summer heat turned the coach into an oven, and dust infiltrated every crack despite the leather window coverings. Water was rationed carefully at each stop, and sleep came in fitful bursts as the coach rocked over rutted trails. Yet Lillian found herself strangely exhilarated by the adventure and by the company of her protector, whose vigilance never wavered. At night, when they stopped at way stations, Vincent insisted on checking each establishment thoroughly before allowing Lillian inside. His protective instincts both amused and touched her. During one such evening, as they sat on the porch of a remote station waiting for dinner to be served, Lillian finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "You have family waiting somewhere, Vincent. Someone wondering when you'll return from this assignment." His expression remained neutral, but she noticed his hands stilled their movement on the knife he'd been sharpening. "No one's waiting. My parents died before the war, no siblings. Had a sweetheart once, but she married a banker while I was fighting, probably for the best." "That sounds lonely," Lillian said softly. "It's the life I chose." He tested the knife's edge with his thumb. "Makes it easier to do this job having no attachments. And is that what you want? No attachments?" Vincent looked at her then, really looked at her, and Lillian felt her heart quicken. "I used to think so." The moments stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities, until the station keeper's wife called them in for supper. Throughout the meal, Lillian was acutely aware of Vincent's presence, the careful way he selected the seat with the clearest view of both the door and windows. How his eyes continually scanned for threats, even as he maintained polite conversation. He was a man accustomed to danger, to keeping others safe, yet she wondered who protected him from the loneliness he so casually acknowledged. Their arrival in Yuma brought welcome relief from the discomforts of the stagecoach. The frontier town, situated on the Colorado River, was a hub of activity with the Southern Pacific Railroad now connecting it to the rest of the country. They had a day to wait before their train departed for Los Angeles, and Vincent suggested they use the time to rest and replenish their supplies. "Fort Yuma has grown considerably since I was last stationed here," Vincent remarked as they walked through the bustling streets. "The railroad changes everything." "Were you a soldier here?" Lillian asked, grateful for the parasol that shielded her from the merciless sun. "Deputy sheriff for a time, before the marshal's service recruited me." He guided her around a muddy patch in the street, his hand lightly touching her elbow. There's a decent hotel near the depot where we can stay tonight. Separate rooms, of course," he added quickly. Lillian suppressed a smile at his propriety. Of course. The hotel was indeed decent by frontier standards, clean, with actual glass in the windows and doors that locked securely. After settling into her room, Lillian took the opportunity to bathe and change into fresh clothing. The simple act of washing away days of travel dust lifted her spirits enormously. When she met Vincent in the hotel dining room for supper, she noticed he too had cleaned up, traded his trail-worn clothes for a clean shirt, and even trimmed his beard. Something about seeing him this way, more gentleman than lawman, caused a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with hunger. "You look refreshed," he said, standing as she approached the table. "As do you." Lillian seated herself, smoothing her skirts. "I confess I've developed a new appreciation for regular bathing after our journey." Dinner was the most relaxed meal they'd shared since meeting. Away from the Montgomery ranch and its painful associations, Lillian found herself laughing at Vincent's dry observations about their fellow travelers and the quirks of life in the territories. In turn, he seemed genuinely interested in her stories of growing up as the daughter of a successful rancher and mining investor. "Your father must have been quite a man," Vincent remarked as they lingered over coffee. "Building all that from nothing." "He was," Lillian agreed, her smile tinged with sadness. "I always thought I'd have more time with him. He wanted grandsons to teach ranching to, but you weren't ready to marry just to please him." Lillian looked up, surprised at his perception. "Exactly. The local prospects were either twice my age or half my intelligence. Father understood, thankfully. He said he'd rather see me independent than unhappily wed. A progressive view for a man of his generation. He had his moments." Lillian traced the rim of her coffee cup. "Though I sometimes wonder if I'll regret not starting a family of my own someday." Vincent's expression softened. "You're young yet, Lillian. 21 gives you plenty of time to find the right partner. And you, at what age does a marshal decide to hang up his badge for a homestead?" "I'm 32 this October. Most in my profession don't live long enough to retire." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "That's a grim perspective. It's realistic, but lately—" He hesitated, then seemed to reconsider whatever he'd been about to say. "We should turn in early. Train leaves at first light." That night, Lillian lay awake in her hotel room, replaying their conversation. There had been moments when Vincent's professional demeanor slipped, revealing glimpses of a man who perhaps wanted more than the solitary life he'd chosen. She wondered if she was foolish to hope he might be developing feelings for her as she was for him. After all, he was fulfilling an assignment, doing his duty. Yet the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice told a different story. The train journey to Los Angeles passed more comfortably than the stagecoach, though Vincent remained vigilant. He insisted they take a private compartment, explaining that it was easier to ensure her safety with controlled access. Lillian didn't argue, secretly pleased at the arrangement that allowed them more privacy for conversation. As the landscape outside transformed from desert to coastal mountains, they talked about books they'd read, places they hoped to see, and gradually, more personal matters. Vincent spoke of his childhood in Virginia, his father's small farm, and the war that had claimed so many of his generation. Lillian shared memories of her mother, who had died when she was 12, and her complicated feelings about her father's subsequent marriage to Eleanor. "I should have seen through her," Lillian said, watching the scenery blur past. "There were signs." "What kind of signs?" Vincent asked. "Little things. How she'd undermine my relationship with father, the way household accidents seemed to happen whenever I opposed her. Once, My saddle girth mysteriously frayed through during a ride. I was lucky I wasn't seriously injured when it broke. Lillian shook her head. I dismissed it all as coincidence or my own imagination. Vincent's jaw tightened. You couldn't have known she was capable of murder. Perhaps not. But I knew she was unkind, yet I said nothing to father for fear of seeming jealous or childish. Lillian met his gaze. We're often blind to the darkest capabilities of others until it's too late. Not always, Vincent countered, reaching across to briefly touch her hand. Sometimes we're given second chances to see clearly. The moment hung between them, charged with meaning, until the train whistle announced their approach to a station, breaking the spell. Yet something had shifted, a boundary crossed that couldn't be re-established. Los Angeles greeted them with moderate temperatures, and ocean breezes a welcome change from the desert heat. Their steamer to San Francisco wouldn't depart until the following afternoon, giving them time to explore the rapidly growing city. Vincent suggested they visit Olvera Street to sample authentic Mexican cuisine. The best chili con carne north of the border, he promised as they navigated the colorful marketplace. Unless you'd prefer something more refined, Lillian smiled. I've eaten my share of trail food and ranch cooking. I'm hardly delicate. The small cantina Vincent chose was indeed excellent, and Lillian delighted in the spicy flavors and lively atmosphere. Surrounded by music and laughter, with good food and Vincent's attentive company, she felt lighter than she had in months. Thank you, she said as they strolled back toward their hotel, the evening air cool against her skin. For dinner, it was my pleasure. For everything. For saving my life, for bringing Eleanor to justice, for accompanying me on this journey. Lillian stopped walking to face him directly. You've done far more than duty required. Vincent's expression grew serious. Lillian, I need to tell you something. A shout from down the street interrupted whatever confession he'd been about to make. Two men were arguing loudly, their dispute escalating rapidly. Vincent instinctively positioned himself between Lillian and the potential threat. Let's continue back to the hotel, he said, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. They had nearly reached the safety of their lodgings when Lillian noticed a figure following them, a man in a dark coat whose face was obscured by a hat pulled low. She tugged Vincent's sleeve, alerting him with a whispered warning. Vincent assessed the situation with a quick glance. Keep walking naturally. When we reach the corner, we'll make a sudden turn. They followed his plan, quickening their pace after turning. The man behind them did the same, confirming Lillian's suspicions. Vincent guided her into the recessed doorway of a closed shop, drawing his pistol. Stay behind me, he instructed, his voice low and steady. The follower appeared seconds later, slowing when he didn't immediately spot them. Vincent stepped out, weapon raised. That's far enough, friend, he said, his marshal's badge visible in the lamplight. State your business. The man froze, hands raised. No trouble, Marshal, just delivering a message for Miss Montgomery. From whom? Mrs. Eleanor Montgomery sends her regards from prison, the man said with a smirk. Says to tell her stepdaughter that blood debts don't vanish with iron bars. Vincent moved with lightning speed, pinning the messenger against the wall. You threatening this lady? Just passing along words, Marshal. No law against that. There are laws against criminal conspiracy and intimidation, Vincent growled. I could arrest you right now. The man's bravado faltered. I was paid to deliver a message, that's all. Don't want no trouble with the law. Vincent released him with a rough shove. Get out of my sight, and tell whoever's paying you that Miss Montgomery is under federal protection. Any threat to her will be dealt with harshly. The man scurried away, glancing back nervously as he disappeared into the darkness. Lillian leaned against the shop wall, trembling slightly. She won't stop, will she? Even from prison. Vincent holstered his weapon and gently took her arm. "We'll increase security for the rest of our journey. And I'll wire ahead to San Francisco for additional protection when we arrive." Back at the hotel, Vincent insisted on checking Lillian's room thoroughly before allowing her inside. He then positioned himself in a chair outside her door, determined to stand guard through the night. "This is unnecessary," Lillian protested. "You need rest as much as I do." "I've gone without sleep in more dangerous situations," Vincent replied, his expression brooking no argument. "Please, Lillian, it would ease my mind." Unable to dissuade him, Lillian reluctantly bid him good night. Yet sleep eluded her as she pondered this new development. Eleanor's reach extended beyond her prison cell, a sobering realization. More troubling, however, was the knowledge that her time with Vincent would eventually end. Once she was settled in San Francisco, his official duties would be concluded. The thought left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. Morning brought no further incidents, and they boarded the steamer without trouble. Vincent had arranged for a private cabin on the upper deck, affording better security and a magnificent view of the coastline. As the ship pulled away from the harbor, Lillian stood at the railing, watching Los Angeles recede in the distance. "I've never seen the ocean before yesterday," she confessed when Vincent joined her. "It's both terrifying and beautiful." "Much like life itself," he observed. Lillian studied his profile against the endless blue horizon. "What were you going to tell me last night, before we were interrupted?" Vincent hesitated, his hands gripping the railing. "That my assignment officially ends when we reach San Francisco. I'm aware of that. But what you may not know is that I've requested a transfer to the Northern California district." He turned to face her. "If approved, I'd be stationed in San Francisco." Lillian's pulse quickened. "Why would you do that?" "I think you know why, Lillian." His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the open air surrounding them. "These past weeks with you have been. I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness despite everything you've endured." "Vincent, let me finish, please. I know the timing is inappropriate. You're still processing your father's murder, adjusting to a new life. And I'm still your assigned protector. But when that duty ends, I'd like permission to call on you properly. Not as a marshal, but as a man who finds himself thinking about a future he never considered possible before." Lillian's eyes stung with unexpected tears. "I'd like that very much." Vincent's smile transformed his face, erasing the hard lines of his profession. For a moment he looked younger, unburdened. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet certain. "Then I'll count the days." The 3-day voyage to San Francisco passed in a strange limbo state. Vincent maintained his professional distance in public. Yet during private moments, their conversations deepened, laying the foundation for something more. They spoke of their hopes, their fears, the sort of life each envisioned. Vincent confessed his weariness with the constant danger of his profession, his growing desire for stability. Lillian shared her uncertainties about managing her inheritance and finding purpose beyond being James Montgomery's daughter. "I've been thinking about opening a school," she told him one evening as they watched the sunset from the deck. "Father always valued education, sent me to finishing school in Denver despite neighbors thinking it wasteful for a girl." "You'd make an excellent teacher," Vincent said, genuine admiration in his voice. "The territories need more education, especially for young women." "Perhaps not immediately. I should take time to settle in San Francisco, learn about the city, but eventually." She smiled. "I'd like to make a difference, the way my father did through his businesses." "You already have," Vincent said softly. "You've changed at least one life immeasurably." Their arrival in San Francisco brought a flurry of activity. Lillian's aunt, Margaret Wilson, greeted them warmly at the pier, insisting Vincent stay for dinner after escorting them safely to her Nob Hill mansion. The contrast between the rugged frontier towns and San Francisco's urban sophistication struck Lillian. Immediately paved streets, grand buildings, ladies in the latest fashions, and gentlemen in fine suits. Aunt Margaret proved a gracious hostess, showing Lillian to a beautifully appointed guest room that would be hers until she decided on more permanent arrangements. A widow of considerable means herself, Margaret had maintained her independence while navigating San Francisco's social circles with aplomb. "Your Marshal is quite handsome," Margaret commented as she helped Lillian unpack, "and utterly smitten with you, if I'm any judge of such matters." Lillian blushed. "He's been very protective." "Protective, yes, but it's more than duty in his eyes when he looks at you." Margaret patted her niece's hand. "I won't pry, dear. Just know that I approve should anything develop. A man who respects a woman's intelligence is worth 10 who only admire her appearance." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Vincent showing a side of himself Lillian hadn't fully seen before. Charming, well-read, capable of discussing topics from politics to literature. Whatever tests her shrewd aunt might have subtly administered, he passed with ease. As the evening concluded, the moment Lillian had dreaded arrived. Vincent stood in the foyer, hat in hand, preparing to take his leave and report to the local marshal's office. "I'll check in tomorrow," he promised. "And I should have news about my transfer within the week." "Thank you for everything, Marshal Ainsley," Lillian said formally. Aware of her aunt and the butler hovering nearby, Vincent bowed slightly. "It was my honor, Miss Montgomery," but his eyes conveyed much more than his words. The following days passed in a whirl as Lillian adjusted to San Francisco life. Aunt Margaret introduced her to society friends, showed her the city's landmarks, and advised her on financial matters. Lillian met with her father's banking representatives, began exploring real estate opportunities for her school idea, and gradually settled into a routine. Vincent called regularly, initially under the pretense of security updates, then more openly as a suitor once his transfer was approved. They attended the theater, visited museums, and took carriage rides through Golden Gate Park, always properly chaperoned as befitted a courtship in polite society. Yet Lillian treasured their rare moments alone, when conversation could flow freely, and Vincent would occasionally, daringly, take her hand or brush a kiss across her knuckles. 2 months after their arrival in San Francisco, Vincent invited Lillian to dinner at one of the city's finest restaurants. Aunt Margaret, recognizing the significance of the invitation, helped Lillian select a new gown for the occasion, emerald silk, that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. "You look beautiful," Vincent said when she descended the mansion's grand staircase. He stood taller somehow in his formal attire, his usually tanned face clean-shaven, his eyes bright with anticipation. The restaurant overlooked the bay, its elegant interior illuminated by crystal chandeliers. As they were seated at a private table with a spectacular view, Lillian noticed Vincent seemed uncharacteristically tense. "Is everything all right?" she asked after their wine was poured. "Perfect," he assured her, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm simply. This evening is important to me." Conversation flowed more naturally as their meal progressed. Vincent spoke of his new position with the Marshal's service, more administrative than his previous role, investigating financial crimes rather than chasing desperados across the frontier. Lillian shared news of a promising building she'd found for her school, located in a neighborhood with many working families who might benefit from additional educational opportunities. As dessert was served, Vincent reached across the table to take her hand. "Lillian, there's something I need to ask you," her heart quickened. "Yes. Before I do, there's something you should know." He drew a deep breath. "The night we met, when I stopped you from drinking that wine, I wasn't sent by your father's lawyer." Lillian frowned in confusion. "I don't understand." "I was investigating a series of suspicious deaths across the territory's wealthy men who died suddenly, leaving everything to new young wives. Your father's case fit the pattern. I came to your house that night to question Eleanor, not expecting to find you in immediate danger." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I lied about why I was there, because I needed to gain your trust quickly, to protect you while building the case against her." Lillian absorbed this revelation slowly. "So our meeting was pure coincidence, or providence," Vincent suggested, his expression earnest. "I've thought about it often. What if I'd arrived 5 minutes later? What if I'd decided to wait until morning? The very idea haunts me. But you didn't. You arrived exactly when needed. I've never been a religious man, Lillian, but meeting you, saving you, it changed everything. For the first time, I understood what it meant to have purpose beyond duty." Vincent reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Which brings me to my question." Lillian's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring, a single perfect diamond set in gold. "Lillian Montgomery, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me there's more to living than merely surviving. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes, Vincent, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then raised her hand to his lips. "I promise to protect you, honor you, and love you for all my days." "And I promise the same," Lillian whispered, overwhelmed by joy, and the knowledge that her father would have approved wholeheartedly of the man before her. Their wedding took place the following spring in the garden of Aunt Margaret's mansion. The ceremony was intimate but elegant, attended by Vincent's colleagues from the Marshal's service and the friends Lillian had made in San Francisco. As they exchanged vows beneath an arbor covered with climbing roses, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey that began with tragedy, but had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. The Ainsleys established a home in a handsome Victorian near Lillian's school, which opened its doors 6 months after their wedding. The Lillian Montgomery Ainsley Academy for Young Women quickly gained a reputation for excellent education, particularly for girls from less privileged backgrounds who received scholarships funded by Lillian's inheritance. Vincent's career with the Marshal's service flourished as he applied his investigative skills to complex financial crimes. His work often took him away from home for short periods, but he always returned with the same look of wonder that he had found such happiness after years of solitary duty. Their first child, a son named James after Lillian's father, arrived the following year, followed 2 years later by twins, a boy and girl they named William and Charlotte. Their home echoed with children's laughter, a sound that healed the final wounds left by Eleanor's betrayal. Eleanor Montgomery remained in prison, her appeals denied, her threats eventually fading to bitter silence. The shadow she had cast over Lillian's life receded with each passing year, replaced by the warm light of family and purpose. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Lillian with a picnic in Golden Gate Park. As they watched their children play nearby, he presented her with a crystal wine glass filled with her favorite claret. "Remember the first time we met?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with the smile that still made her heart race. Lillian laughed. "How could I forget? You made quite an entrance, knocking that glass from my hand. Best thing I ever did." Vincent raised his own glass in toast. "To Providence, to second chances, and to the woman who taught me the meaning of home." As their glasses clinked together, Lillian silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought Vincent Ainsley to her door that night in Tucson. From near tragedy had come the greatest blessing of her life, a family built on love, truth, and the courage to begin again. In the years that followed, the Ainsley family thrived. Lillian's school expanded to a second location, offering education to boys as well as girls. Vincent eventually retired from the Marshal's service to establish a private detective agency specializing in financial fraud. His reputation for integrity and thoroughness, bringing clients from across the West Coast. Their children grew strong and kind, each finding their own path, James following his father into law enforcement, William pursuing medicine, and Charlotte becoming one of the first female attorneys in California. Throughout it all, Vincent and Lillian remained each other's steadfast supporters, their love deepening with each challenge overcome and each joy shared. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes sit together on their veranda, hands intertwined, and marvel at the life they had built from such unlikely beginnings. "You ever wonder what might have happened if we hadn't met that night?" Lillian once asked. Vincent brought her hand to his lips, a gesture unchanged by decades of marriage. "I don't need to wonder. I know exactly what happened. I found my heart, my home, and my purpose all in the moment I saved the woman who would save me in return." And that, both agreed, was the truest definition of providence they could imagine.